Welcome to Chamber Talk, brought to you by North Orange County Chamber, where we explore the stories and insights of leaders, business owners and CEOs from various sectors who are making a difference in our community and region. Whether you're tuning in via podcast or joining us via video, we're glad to have you here. Hi, I'm your host, Andrew Gregson, and today's conversation is part of our Civic Leadership Series, where we get to meet people who are stepping forward to serve our region and to help shape our future. Our guest today is Lisa Ramirez, an attorney, community advocate, and candidate for the U.S. Congress of California's 40th District. Lisa's story began with an interest in international human rights law, and through a non-profit fellowship, she discovered immigration law, a field that's become her life's work for more than over 25 years. Lisa, thank you for coming on today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
So I appreciate you bearing the weather today. Our listeners might not know, but actually it's raining pretty heavy today, so thanks for making it up.
No problem.
So I wanted to start off with an easy one, really, is basically what motivated you to just decide to throw your hat in the ring and run for Congress?
Yeah. So I think for me, I have dedicated, honestly, my entire life to serving people. I love people. I care deeply about people. As an immigration lawyer, early on in this administration, beginning to see, unlawful apprehensions of lawful permanent residents, of U.S. citizens, of people throughout my community, made me concerned. And then with, the taking away of their due process rights, right? For immigrants not to have access to the courts and the judges, to be able to make, that the decision, the evaluation of their case, then, my concern grew a little more. Then we saw, facilities like, Alligator Alcatraz, pop up. And so for me, watching the erosion of our constitutional rights is what became, extremely concerning. But the straw that broke the camel's back for me was the day when the National Guard in June rolled into the streets of Santa Ana. And I thought to myself, this is beyond what we believe is happening. I looked around and felt helpless as a lawyer.
Right.
If they're ignoring court orders, if I'm not able to have access to the courts to defend my clients, I needed to do something and I didn't know what else to do. So for me, the response was entering this race. If I thought there was a candidate in the race that I could have gotten behind, that would have been my first preference. My interest is to serve the people of my community, ensure that government is working for them and not the other way around.
Okay. So Lisa, I wanted to spin back a little bit because thank you for sharing that. And those are great reasons why you would throw your hat in the ring and do something like that. So let's start off with, obviously, international human rights law. That's a whopper. So why not share a little bit? What made you first think about that before we lead into the fellowship and the nonprofit? Yeah.
So I think, again, it's my love of people. So I've always been inclined when we had international students in high school, I would be the one to befriend them. I'm just genuinely curious about people from different countries, from different cultures. I love food. I love exploring food. And so it really started in my childhood in terms of that interest in what was happening in different parts of the world. And I did, my father was not only president of the Chamber of Commerce, he was also the president of the Rotary Club. And so in high school, I had the privilege of being an exchange student. So I lived for a summer in Italy with a family, and it was just eye-opening. When you step outside of this country and you experience what life is like in other places of the world, and it's not just the culture and the food, it's the history. It's a different dynamic. It's the politics. It's the way they approach education. I became all the more fascinated, right? We're still very much a young country in comparison to the rest of the world. So the more opportunities I had to meet people in college and undergrad, my work study was in the International Students Office. So I was a mentor to some of these international students from all over the world, quite honestly. And I was fascinated. I remember one particular student who was Ecuadorian, but he was Korean and spoke Spanish. And I just thought the intersection of just the diversity and the multicultural aspects of even the international students,
So,
was just really fascinating. So my plan was not to go to law school. I will be quite honest. It was a very dear friend of mine from high school, because I did speech and debate and I did very well, who was very insistent. He was at Hastings and said, I really think you should consider applying. And I thought he was crazy. I said, I had no money. I was raised by a single mom. I didn't have money for an LSAT course.
right.
But he just persisted with scholarship applications, with information. And I said, fine, I will. If I take that LSAT and I do well enough to get in, I'll go. And if I don't, I won't. And obviously did well enough to
It was
go
meant
in.
to be.
Yes.
It was meant to be. So you said your father was in Rotary and president of the chamber. Which Rotary club was he in?
In Covina.
Oh, Covina.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
And it was Covina Chamber, was it?
Yes. Yep.
Oh, look at that. I remember those neck of the woods. So another thing that you did, so after you finished university, you got a fellowship at a non-profit, and then that immediately changed your whole world around. So do you mind sharing how immigration just became your passion and love?
Yes. Well, in law school, all of my elective courses were in international human rights. What I didn't know at the end of the day was all the jobs were in London, DC, and New York. That was poor planning on my part. And so I didn't have a plan B. So I applied for a fellowship, which placed me in Orange County. And this nonprofit's greatest need was immigration. Not having taken a single immigration law class in law school, I was very grateful to have some of the best national mentors on speed dial. And I'm kind of a trial by fire. I jump right in, as long as I know enough to ask the right questions when needed. And it really is international human rights. Instead of me going to the world, it's really the world coming to me.
Right,
yes.
right. That's true. And you've been in the job for nearly 25 years, right?
I've been a licensed attorney for 25 years, yes.
Wow, that's quite a while. That's significant. So over the time, do you mind sharing a little bit about some of the impacts that stick in your mind regarding whether it's individuals, families, or employers you've helped through this time as an attorney?
So I will say probably in the very beginning, we worked with a lot of refugees, resettling Cambodians, Vietnamese, but then also it was really, I would say at the very beginning when human trafficking was becoming a concern. It was before, all the publicity I feel that whole area gets right now. So it was before the Orange County Human Trafficking Task Force. I mean, it was in the very beginning. And so for me, I think working with the asylum seekers, the trafficking, human trafficking victims, victims of domestic violence, victims of violent crime, I would say those were probably the most heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, cases that to this day will forever stick with me. And they're hard. They were difficult cases, whether I was accompanying them, as witnesses to federal courts because they were, prosecuting the smugglers, or if I was representing the individual in removal proceedings and seeking asylum. And I'll never forget because it was, the first case that I ever lost. And it was an Iraqi who had worked with the U.S. In Iraq. We were unsuccessful. And I truthfully believed if he was sent back, he would be killed. And to this day, I really do wonder whatever happened to him and if he's even still alive. So when you hear some of the stories of what people have endured and how they've been persecuted, whether because of their race or their religion, their nationality, or because they're part of a social group. One, I think it makes you appreciate and makes you complain less about the inconveniences we might face here. But also, I think it's really what drives me to be the best that I can be, because there are people who are really counting on great advocates, right, to access their rights and due process here.
And for those watching today, I'm assuming, going through immigration myself to be here, there's a big difference between immigration levels, whether you're coming into the country because you maybe married a spouse or maybe you're starting a business, compared to somebody who's coming into the country due to maybe there's a domestic violence situation or you're a refugee. Do you mind sharing quickly or shortly the differences between the two? Because I think people might just put it in one box, and I know it's very different.
Yeah, no, it's very different. I would kind of categorize them into three buckets, if you will. You've got the employment-based category. So those are highly specialized skill, labor force where we don't have enough workers, in the United States to fill those positions. So an employer, can sponsor someone to come to the United States. They can sponsor them temporarily temporarily, or they can sponsor them for their green card or permanent residency. Then you've got the family-based, bucket. Those are people who are married to U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents. They could be children of U.S. citizens. Even thinking about expats, that live abroad and they fall in love and they get married, they build a family, and now they want to come back. So it's all that immigration process for U.S. citizens and their families as well. That would include fiancés. And I would say we did more fiancé visas during COVID, believe it or not, than ever before. Not sure that was a great time, because when people really don't have that long-term relationship,
Right.
it's, uncertain how that's going to end. But we don't have a dating visa. So you either agree to be engaged and get married within 90 days of arriving or not. And then I would say the last bucket is the humanitarian category, right? And so that really is the asylum seekers, the refugees, those on temporary protected status. It's quite, the human trafficking, T visas, it is a much more vulnerable population, but there's criteria, right? So it's not that the law allows everyone and anyone who's looking for a better life or who's, facing dire conditions in their home country. So there are very, very specific requirements and qualifications that they must satisfy in order to qualify for any benefit in that humanitarian fold. So I think people are often mistaken, and they think, and I've been accused, you help the illegals. And I said, unfortunately, I can only help those that the law allows to be helped.
Yeah.
And so that is really the general, I'd say, category of folks that, come to the United States. And it's amazing what becomes of them. And for me, it's been quite a gift and a privilege to play a small, role in their journey. And
it's a huge role, really. When you're able to come to a country like this, and the attorneys or the attorney that's helped you through it, it's actually a big part of it, because imagine what you can do once you're here.
Yeah.
So you do play a big role.
It is significant, but what they do with that opportunity,
Yes, that's true.
I can't take credit for.
You can't do anything
absolutely.
with that.
Yeah, they impressed me.
So just out of interest, obviously, if you're coming over through a business, usually the business is going to front some of that money. If you're coming over as an individual, as I did, obviously I've got to find that money. What happens to those who are in that last bucket? Who is that? You try and find grants for that? Is it how does that?
Yeah. So they're heavily dependent on the nonprofit sector. I'm not going to lie, right? So unless an attorney like myself is committed to doing pro bono work, which we are as a firm, I sit on the board of the Public Law Center. And so we're always having at least one or two cases, Veterans Legal Institute, to help and support the veterans with their needs as much as possible. But I don't think it's commonplace, right? So that is why people that may not have the resources to pay for a private lawyer are heavily dependent on the nonprofits. And I think right now in this day and age, we're seeing really the perfect storm, not, in light of the storm we're seeing today, but where the demand is higher than ever, and yet the funding is being cut. And so the resources are scarce. And so for those individuals, some of them are left to fend for themselves and to try to figure out and navigate. And that includes small children. I've represented a child as young as 3.
Wow.
And that was, pro bono, and it's like how we put children in these court hearings without representation. They're not entitled to it at government expense.
Right.
And so for me, it's compelling to do the pro bono work that we do because you see the need is so great. At least for those that qualify, they deserve the representation.
So when I was listening to you there, the other bucket you were talking is the, whatever it is, E2, whatever visa it is, when you're coming in for a business. And I know, hot topic right now is obviously immigration is really, playing a major field on who stays and who goes and what's happening. But workforce is being taken away, and they're not necessarily getting filled by people who are already here. Does that mean that businesses in the future might sponsor some of those to come back and work here?
So I'd say anything is possible. However, the financial cost is a significant deterrent, right? So whether we're talking about the $100,000, H-1B visa fee that was recently announced, really came as a shock to many of our clients, and I think companies and employers, across the country.
Everyone,
right. So you have that piece where there is a significant decline in employers being willing to sponsor individuals, especially when you're looking at that level of cost. Mm-hmm. Now, on the other extreme of the spectrum, I would say are, the agricultural workers that really are going to impact our economy. They're going to impact the cost of goods and basic things like food.
Yeah.
And so, there's different proposals, being thrown around in terms of how we solve that. None of it is actually dealing with the current existing reality that we have undocumented workers that really need to come out of the shadows that have contributed to this society. We're going on almost 40 years. Next year will be 40 years without any immigration reform. And so if you think about how much the world has changed in 40 years.
That's a long time, isn't it?
I would think so, yes. And people wonder why our immigration laws don't work. It's because we're stuck back in the 1980s.
Back in the day, yeah.
And so really for those employers, there's programs being, tossed around. But again, it would require them to pay for those visa fees, pay for the legal representation, and pay the prevailing wages, which they don't do right now. So granted, yes, those are all ideal, programs. However, I don't know on a practical level, employers that are going to be able to afford that without raising the cost of goods and services. And so really it'll be up to the consumer to see what they can stomach or have to do without.
At the Chamber, our mission is quite simple. We want to keep business in business. And I know, obviously, you have worked closely with some employers in the past, and you're obviously an employer yourself. So what do you see as the biggest challenges facing small business owners right now?
That is a great question. And I have to start with this because this is something that really became a reality for me just yesterday, which is we're going through our open enrollment and health insurance costs, right? And so we know, we anticipated, we've heard a lot, especially during this government shutdown, of what this, HR1 bill that passed and cutting Medicaid and cutting, people's access to the Affordable Care Act. Those premiums are going to, for some people more than double, if not triple. And I have been reading about the impact we can anticipate as employers, and I've heard like 6 to 7%. But when we sat down with our broker yesterday, I was absolutely shocked that the best deal really for us is an 18% increase, right? And so I know that I'm not the only small business or employer that does its best to offer health insurance to its employees. Maybe not everyone does, but those of us who really want to be good employers, right? We want to offer that. When you see that cost, and I can't really put that on the backs of my employees if I don't increase their salary. And so again, we're faced, with the same predicament, which is how do we, stomach those costs and at the same time, without, I guess, perhaps is a better, how do we stomach those costs without raising the price for our goods and services? I just don't think it's going to be possible. People's wages are not keeping up with the rate of inflation. So if I want to, increase for the cost of living, if I want to pay a decent wage, if I want to offer health insurance to, my staff and my employees, that means my expenses are going to significantly increase. And the only way I can balance my budget, because those of us in the business world, we don't get to incur a deficit unless we're going to create a path to bankruptcy. And so the only way to make that, happen is really to increase costs. And again, it just puts the cost of goods and services out of the reach for many Americans who are on fixed incomes.
It makes you almost, after a while, you can't continue like that. You can't keep putting more, because the only way of making more revenue for a business is really is the amount that you're charging for people. They can only pay so much. It can only stay competitive for a while. Forget competency right now. Really, at the end of the day, you can't do anything like you say because of the insurance and all the other bits and pieces.
Yeah.
Just out of interest, obviously, as you're running for Congress, usually folks have a few major points that they really run on. May you share what yours are?
Yeah, I would say there are 3 basic ones. It's the economy. I really think, and it's the affordability of how Americans are going to be able to afford basic needs, housing, food, healthcare, prescriptions, to make things affordable, for every American, I think, is first and foremost the biggest issue for me and for my campaign. And really understanding, having worked with, seniors having difficulty, accessing their benefits, working with very low income, people. I mean, they're working sometimes 2, 3 jobs in a household in one home, working multiple jobs just to be able to cover, rent and basic needs.
Right.
There's no luxuries that they can afford. The second thing is healthcare. I think healthcare is our most valuable asset as human beings. Without our health, we have nothing to offer. We have nothing to contribute. So how do we have, world-renowned healthcares and hospitals in this country, which
Right.
we can be very proud of. And yet what it
Can't
costs,
afford to go.
we can't
Yeah.
afford to access them ourselves.
Yeah.
And even for the insured, right? Like myself, I will tell you a story of my son breaking a finger, fractured 2 and broke a finger. It was $8,000 later, and I won't bore you with the entire story, with insurance to get his fingers,
Bandaged up or
seen
whatever.
and viewed. It wasn't even surgery. So my own experience as an educated, I consider myself very privileged and insured. When that becomes, an $8,000, broken finger, I can only imagine the catastrophic, life, health challenges that many of our families face and individuals face, whether they're elderly or whether they're children in shock hospital.
Sure.
So I think across the board. So the second piece is the healthcare. And then the third piece, it would be foolish not to say, but it's immigration.
Right.
It's really, I have always said that the immigration crisis is something that was created and perpetuated by Congress. It is not rocket science to fix. There's not the political will, but I think we need to put an end to using immigrants as political pawns. And that goes for both sides of the aisle. So I think there's very practical solutions that we can come to. And come to an agreement on, and perhaps maybe the place we start, because I think it's maybe where there's the most support, is their DACA, right? The young people that we as taxpayers have invested in their education. They've graduated, they're working, and it's time for, giving them an opportunity to legalize their status. And there's other, ideas I have.
So I'd like to dig a little bit deeper, because this is really, this is important. This is how why people chooses to vote for one person over another one. So your affordability, that's a big topic right now. We've got apartments that are just being built behind here that are selling for $900,000, and the best will in the world, that ain't worth that. And then of course there's other affordability things, mainstream. You mentioned insurance, which is totally, that's another thing, that's healthcare, but still it all adds up. So going into Congress, what do you think the changes are? What can Congress do to change those things?
Well, I think there's a lot that Congress can do, but I think first and foremost, we as voters, we as people, as citizens, need to really hold Congress accountable. It is our tax dollars that they get to even make government exist, right? And so I think we really need to be more engaged in terms of what is done with those dollars. How are they being reinvested back into the American people to make life better, right? I think that's what we're all fundamentally interested in, is how do we make life better for everyone? We are not in a country where we have to have a refugee mentality. It's not a state of scarcity, no matter how much fear mongering, likes to be,
Sure.
expressed in news. There is plenty to go around. And I think it's really about putting those dollars and reinvesting it back into the lives of American people, whether in the form of tax credits, right? Or the basic food programs, right? Like SNAP, or it's, not giving those tax dollars away, putting them in the pockets of billionaires that will never, ever benefit the people who gave those tax dollars to begin with.
Yeah.
So for me, I think, the control of the pharmaceutical, industry and the drug prices. There are people in other parts of the world that pay less for American manufactured drugs than we do. There's
right.
something wrong with that picture.
Yeah.
Now, I get you've got to, everything's relative in relationship to their economy. But nonetheless, I really do believe that we have to prioritize the American people and how we spend those federal dollars to make their lives better and sustainable.
Now, just out of interest, what's your thought process regarding this? So, often we hear on the news that California's the fourth largest economy in the world, and it is a large economy. However, I would say a good 70% of us are not feeling that we're in the wealthiest economy in the world because we can't afford things. What's your stance there? Where does that have to change?
Yeah, well, I will say I am proud to be born and raised and have lived my entire life in California. I think it's the best state, if not, country in the world. I mean, we could stand alone and obviously compete with the best of them economically. Sure. I think the diversity, the social aspects of the state, and just the diversity, the ecosystem, even diversity of what we have to offer here. But it is extraordinarily expensive to live in California, to do business in California, right? I think that is just the bottom line. And I know that there's a lot of people that are having to move out, right? And we're losing businesses and we're losing people, quite honestly, because they can't afford to buy a home, here in the state. So I think that we really need to relook at how we are treating and supporting businesses, right? Not just the economy in terms of what we produce and what we sell and what we, export, if you will, but also, leading the country, if not the world, in terms of how we protect, workers' rights, but also make it possible and affordable for businesses to remain in California. I think there's a role for government to play in regulation, not to micromanage, and make it really difficult for businesses to stay, nimble, but at the same time to, create an environment that works both for business and for people. And I think there's a way that we can do that. And I think, the investments that come back, from the federal government and how those dollars are spent will really make or break the future of the state and ultimately, honestly, our country.
Oh, right. It's almost like be accountable and sort of like show everybody else how to do it right.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think really California is a leader, and I think California leads in so many respects. And I'm very proud of what we've been able to create and build as a state. Do we have a long way to go? Absolutely. Could we always use improvement? Absolutely. But I think we're on the right track in many respects.
I think some of it could also do with, you mentioned before that immigration was, hasn't been reformed for over 40 years. Maybe some of the things that we're running today still need a re-evaluation of how life is today to then make it more of a sensible playing field for all. Maybe that's part of that.
Yeah. And I really think if Americans and the people again get re-engaged, right? I think we've really taken a back seat, if you will, and looking to government to solve our problems. I often like to remind people we are government, right? We, the people, are the government. And so we have untapped possibility for creativity, for ingenuity, for innovation, I think there's only possibility, honestly, of what the future can hold if we can get, many perspectives at the table to think creatively of how we, tackle some of the most challenging, issues. What I think, in many respects, in whether I'm talking to, nonprofits or government, it's the same old, same old. It's like, this is just the way we've always done it. And I've always tried to challenge those perspectives. It's like, well, can we think of a different way of doing it? Just because it's the way we've always done it doesn't mean it's going to carry us into the next century. So I think it's constantly, and I think, the private sector in businesses, we have a lot to learn because I think they are oftentimes on the cutting edge of the innovation, of the technology, of how we can be more creative in solving the problems. And I think public entities really need to be a little bit more open to establish those partnerships. We can learn a lot from each other.
Now, another thing that you're sort of running for or about is healthcare. That's a big deal. And being a business owner, obviously we've got CalSaver now and all these other bits and pieces that are coming in. So what are your main thoughts about the healthcare and how that can be reformed and what can be done?
So I think that every person should have access to basic healthcare, right? It doesn't need to be the Mercedes-Benz. It doesn't need to be, very expensive, lucrative, plan of any sorts. But I do believe that it is an investment that everyone should make in themselves based on their ability to pay, right? So I think for me, we can't do a one size fits all. We can't do a one price fits all. I think the use of, taxpayers' dollars to create those subsidies that some people quite honestly need. But I think we also need, I'm really big, not only on the responsibility and accountability, but also the integrity. I think a lot needs to be looked at because I think our current infrastructure is wrought with fraud. And I think we really need to dig deep and figure out how do we close those loopholes, right? So people aren't taking advantage of a system that they have access to, and really level the playing field for those, especially, our seniors, our veterans, those that are most vulnerable, but they've contributed, so much to this country that the least we can do the least that we can do for them to give back is give them access to the healthcare that they need and they deserve.
So you're thinking more of a national healthcare system?
Yes.
Which, get it, right? I lived in a country that gave that away, and of course Canada does too, right? I could see the sensibility of that in a way. Due to the fact that if you think about it, it's the insurance companies that make the money. As you were saying with your son, with the amount of, I'm sure the majority of that money went to the health insurance company, opposed to maybe the doctor or the nurses who are actually tending to your son. That's going to be a big fight because they have a lot of money. Do you see in that idea there's still a place for private healthcare systems, or so they not merge together, but they work alongside each other? Or are you thinking, no, I feel more like this just like national health insurance type of
No, I don't think it's going to be, one single solution by any stretch of the imagination. And I think there's many wonderful things about the, health program in Canada, but I've got friends there who complain about how difficult it is to be able to get an appointment, to be seen by, because it's, everybody has access. But I really think that there's a hybrid program that we can really create, which again, I think people need to have skin in the game. I don't think it should be free for everyone. I think you should be able to contribute something to your, healthcare premium, to your healthcare plan. But I honestly don't think that we can trust, corporations or the health insurance companies to do right by the patients and the people who need access to the healthcare, because I don't fault the doctors. I don't fault the hospitals. I don't fault the nurses. They are there to make, to do what their calling is, which is to heal people and to make them well. But I think what we really need to get a hold of is the profits that are being pocketed really at the expense of the health and well-being of the American people.
Now, I'm not putting you on the spot here. It's just a question that's rattling around my head. So it's a big deal in the UK right now is because of the national health system that they've had, it's sort of like breaking down because the amount of immigration that's come into the country. Over there, though, it's not quite the same as here. Where do you see there's a balance there? Because that would automatically, for some folks, saying, well, now you're opening the gates for people just to come in and grab our health insurance.
The first problem, is really getting a grip and really legalizing the people that need to be legalized, right? And to be able to bring those individuals that many of them have been here for 30 plus years, out of the shadows. So because whether they're documented or not, they're contributing to
they
the
have
tax
done for
base.
30 odd years, right?
Yes, right. They're contributing, people can criticize that they're working with, fake Social Security, numbers, which I can't condone and I don't support.
Sure.
But nonetheless, they're paying into the Social Security that they will never see back. They're paying into taxes that they will never see back. So, I've read a lot of different, studies, and economically, the undocumented immigrant is actually contributing more to the economy than they actually take away. And I have met in the 25 years, very few, I can't say 100% no one, but very, very few immigrants that have come to this country to take advantage of our healthcare system or benefits.
Right.
I think they're here to work.
Yeah.
I think they're here to contribute, to provide for their family, whether here in the U.S. or abroad. They're here because they've escaped, persecution and near-death experiences. They don't, what is the expression? They don't come to America, they run to America, right? And it's really not to take advantage, it's really to contribute and to weave themselves into the great fabric of a society that we have here.
I think there's a lot more opportunities as well. That's what it really is, isn't it? It is a freer country. So that sort of like leads us nicely into immigration. What do you see the changes are that could immediately make a difference with everything that's going on right now?
Well, I think the dreamers, the DACA, the young people, they're not so young anymore. I don't think any of us thought when DACA was created in 2012, we'd be here 13 years later. I think we thought it was going to be sort of a stopgap until Congress, passed legislation that would, allow that population of young people to legalize their status. So I think that there's a lot of common ground, both from the business community, both from the right, from the left. I think people have a lot of compassion, although it's been quite the roller coaster lately, if you've heard on the news, in terms of, our office got flooded with calls and questions when the administration announced that they're considering, accepting new initial DACA applications. And there's people that have had their, applications frozen since 2021, and everybody got very excited. And then no sooner did they announce that, did they say, they've apprehended 20 DACA people, they've deported one, and they don't acknowledge the protections that deferred action is supposed to give them.
Can I just ask you, I don't mean to interrupt you there, but that's a really important point you mentioned there. You imported somebody who's been here all their life. Where do you export them? Where do you export them to?
When you deport the person?
Yeah, so you deported somebody who's been here all their life. So where do they get, it's not in the TARDIS, where do you get deported to?
Right. So before this year, we usually would expect them to be deported to their country of birth or their citizenship, where they're citizens, right? So they're not necessarily their country of birth. They could be a citizen of another country, but wherever they have citizenship, right? Where they're a national of whatever country. But now, this is the first time in, probably 40 years that I'm aware of that the administration is entering into agreements with third countries and third-party countries so that people can get, deported to Ghana and have no ties, connections, relationships whatsoever. A new agreement that was entered with both Guatemala and Honduras recently is that any asylum seeker, any Spanish-speaking any individual from a Spanish-speaking country seeking asylum in the United States will now need to seek asylum in Guatemala or Honduras. And if you really fear for your life, then you're going to need to go live in Guatemala or Honduras. The exceptions are Cubans and Venezuelans. But so this administration has, in my opinion, for the first time, utilized third country agreements to basically be able to remove people to whatever country, agrees to accept them.
I see what you're saying. Well, that's a good it's a start, right? It's a start somewhere. But what, you're talking about, I'm sorry, I forgot the term, but the kids who were born here, right? And they went to school here, and now they're looking at maybe whether they should stay or not, or they're not documented?
Yeah. So they're not born here. But they could have come when they were, under the age of 16, right? So they were children when they arrived to the United States.
Right.
Some of them babies, 9 months old, 3 years old. They have no recollection of life
Anywhere
in any
else.
other country.
Right.
And as a taxpayer, we've invested in them to pay through their kindergarten, through high school, and, and so that investment. And then before DACA, I used to go and speak at a lot of high schools, and we were throwing away an entire generation that wanted to enter the military, that wanted to go to work, but they couldn't because they didn't have a social security number. They wanted to go to university, and they couldn't because they didn't have, even valedictorians that had full rides to Stanford, to the UCs, they were then denied admittance because they didn't have their social security number. And so DACA really at least gave this limited, temporary, it's not legal status, but protection that these individuals could at least stay here and get a work permit, get a social security number so that they could at least work or continue to go to school. And that's exactly what many of them have done. But now, it's not legal status. And as we've seen, at least 20 people so far, they've been detained or deported, even with DACA.
And so on that point, you're getting deported to, you say, well, your country of origin is X because that's where you were born, but you've never lived there. You've got maybe no family there. You've certainly got no life, no social security, no nothing. Doesn't quite make sense, does it?
I think the piece for me that is more heartbreaking than the impact of that individual and having to reestablish life in somewhere that they're not familiar with is that I think we forget that they don't live in a vacuum. And many of them are married, they've got U.S. citizen children, or they have a U.S. citizen spouse. And those are the people, it's the families that's left behind that actually suffer the most. And that's going to have a bigger impact on us societally and as a mental health expense and everything. I could tell you story after story of, 10-year-olds that stop eating, that, hide under the table, that wet their bed, that, it's traumatizing. It is traumatizing to have a parent, plucked out from your home one day to the next. And it's also traumatizing in the anxiety and the mental health toll it's taking on young people that they don't know if they have one family member who doesn't have legal status. Will they be there when they get home from school? Like, they don't want to go to school now. They're afraid to leave. They're afraid what could happen because of everything that they're hearing about in the news. So this, to me, isn't even an immigrant issue. This is really an issue, at least here in California, when we have so much of the population that is foreign born. Doesn't mean that they're undocumented, right? But we are certainly a very diverse population, and we live in what we call mixed status families, right? So, in Orange County alone, 93% of the 236,000 undocumented people have at least one U.S. citizen child, right? So we've got to think about those children. We've got to think about the impact that we're having. Now, do I think that we should not enforce our laws? No, but I think that there is a decent and humane way of doing so, and it certainly doesn't look like the way it's been being done.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned a little bit earlier, and I'm sorry to stick on this topic, but it's a big one right now, isn't it? Is, we've seen the noise of media and everything else is all about ICE and everything else that's going on. But then, you look back in other administrations, they've done their things too, right? But one thing that stuck out is you said, but we haven't really looked at changing the laws over the years. So why was there a focus on one thing, but then never really figured out what we really all run by, and that's the rules of the game? Why did we miss that?
Why did we not enforce
why didn't we do different rules or look at them again? Or, instead of just, it's almost like it's a Band-Aid. Let's do that instead of like doing the hard work and sitting down and figuring it out. Why did that get missed all these years?
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you in my response because you're looking for something logical. It's politics.
Logical.
It's politics. That to me is the bottom line. It's just how we've used immigrants and immigration laws.
It's just being a tool rather than it's real people, it's real life. Let's somehow deal with it. That is a shame,
I said, it's not rocket science.
Right.
It's not a difficult fix. If there was the political will, it absolutely could be resolved and fixed tomorrow.
So going into Congress, what do you think part of the reform or the start, the beginning, the start? What would you be looking at wanting to do regarding immigration, or even your healthcare, or?
Well, I think one of the unique things about myself is that I work, if you will, across the aisle, across political, perspectives every day. So I think I understand business. I understand, fiscal responsibility. I understand, things from a multitude of perspectives. So when we look at immigration, in addition to giving, DACA an opportunity to legalize, I think we need to get rid of certain arbitrary caps that we've had that make really no sense, whether it is in, H-1B B categories, or whether it's, for people who have success in immigration court and there's only 10,000 that's allowed, whether it's victims of violent crime, there's a 10,000, visa cap. So you just make them wait 15 years, but they're here and you're giving them protection and you're giving more. It just doesn't make sense. So I think there's a lot of the laws and the rules that are very archaic, that no longer fit or meet the needs of the current environment, economy, business, the way people live, work, travel. So I think it's really an update of those laws. I would also, look to getting away from there are very, really going back to the last century, rules about quotas from people from certain countries, right? So if you're from Mexico, if you're from the Philippines, if you're from China, if you're from India, you're going to wait longer for family-based visa priority dates and employment-based visas priority dates for no other reason than because you're from those countries. Now, there's some very fascinating history and reasons why, and it was very to be, anti-Jewish, Italian, anti-Irish, anti-Chinese. There's reasons why the system was created. It no longer makes sense. So if you're a citizen of a U.S. citizen, if you're a sibling of a U.S. citizen, and you're from Mexico, you're going to be waiting 24, 25 years. But if you're from England, guess what? You're going to be waiting maybe 6 or 7. And it makes no sense. It's somewhat discriminatory, if you ask me, because the folks are here for the most part, oftentimes. And so it's like, why would we subject them to a quota that really doesn't have a place in today's world? So I think it's really just updating and eliminating some of the barriers that I think keep people from being able to legalize their status that are already in the queue. These are not new people. These are people whose petitions have been pending for more than 2 decades. And it just doesn't make sense.
So, Lisa, we've talked about the greater good of the world in California. Let's bring it home a little bit to Orange County now. What sort of things are you looking to, whether it's spearhead, look into, find out more about the 40th district?
Yeah. So I think, again, right now, I don't hate to beat a dead horse, but the issue of healthcare, right? If there aren't any changes to HR 1 that was passed, in the 40th district alone, there's going to be 160,000 people that are going to lose access to their, Affordable Care Act subsidies. There's going to be another, and I'm now kind of questioning myself if I'm saying 160,000 or if it was 600. I think it's 160,000, and then another 100. I better be careful with my numbers, and I have it on the TikTok. But there's going to be a significant number of people. TikTok. I know, I do. I had to do TikToks now. I've never in my life wanted to get into TikToks, but that is where people are getting information. So my campaign has a TikTok. My firm has a TikTok. I don't have time to do newsletters, but I could talk for 2 minutes or less on any hot topic. And the news is coming out so quickly that we have to get it out.
So let's just pretend. Let's pretend it's 160, right, to make it easier for you.
Well,
but there's a significant percentage.
There's a significant number of people who are going to lose access to their affordable health care. There's going to be a significant number of people who are going to lose their Medicaid. That is concerning for me. And at a time where the federal funding grants are not coming into our state, much less our county. That's filtered out. The nonprofit boards that I sit on and the nonprofits that I'm very involved with, they are cutting. They're cutting their staff. They're losing, their funding sources. So, like I said, it's like this perfect storm where the demand and need for things like healthcare and food and housing are increasing probably higher. And I don't think we've even seen the beginning, to be quite honest.
Yeah, the scale's going the wrong way, isn't it?
Exactly. And then on top of that, we have, many friends of mine and children of friends of mine who can't even afford to rent, in the communities that they grew up, right? Forget about buying a house. They just want to be able to rent a home and close. So there is just something wrong when the cost of living isn't keeping up with, people's wages, and what they're going to be able to afford. I've got friends who, and it's depending on who it is, I ask, their children are perhaps being forced to return home and to live home as adults, right? And to save money to be able to see what they can put together for rent or for a down payment. I had one friend's kid call it, what did she call it? Oh, Club Med. She says, it's like a Club Med. I said, well, I'm glad you have a positive perspective, but I don't think it's ideal for that generation. I think they're really eager to experience their own independence, to start their own livelihood. And I think that there's ways of making that possible. But again, it's all about what's being done with taxpayer dollars and being able to bring those dollars back to the communities and use it in a way that's going to help people, be able to afford, life and to make ends meet.
So where do you think that starts? Is that, as a congresswoman, is that Orange County supervisors? Is that cities? I mean, cities really not too much about that, is it? Where do you?
Yeah, I would say we start with the cities. All politics is local. And I haven't mentioned this, but I used to serve on the board of the Kennedy Commission.
Okay.
And one of the tasks there is to really increase affordable housing in Orange County. And the way that it was done is holding cities accountable to their housing elements that's required by the state. Like they are obligated to set aside in any new construction a certain percentage of affordable homes.
Right.
It's either that or the developer buys out, right? So they pay the fee or whatever. And so there is litigation that is, that I know the Kennedy Commission, the Public Law Center, has recently pursued to bring accountability for cities to do what they're legally obligated to do. It's like you don't get a free pass thinking that you don't need to provide affordable housing in your community. And maybe it's a NIMBY attitude, not in my backyard, people don't want, but I think we all have an obligation to create balance, to create affordability for vulnerable people in our community, the low-income people, and whether that's veterans or seniors or, immigrants. It's whoever it is that needs it. We all need to be open to creating that space. And when we're not compliant, then I think it's our job to hold those municipalities accountable.
So let's just say, the city is working and they are doing this stuff and the, land's getting passed, permits being made, because we see this. The developer, on the other hand, he doesn't really care too much about affordability, and affordability is thrown around a lot these days. But I mean, there was a survey done not so long ago, and I think the average is between $45,000 to $60,000 is the average household income in Orange County, and the houses are over $1 million. How do you fix the affordability? You can't blame that on the city. Where does that branch out to?
Right. So I'm not one to think about punishments and retributions. Yeah. It's about incentivizing, sure. Right? So what federal tax credits, how can we create federal incentives?
Make a better balance.
To create a better balance, right? So maybe they're not inclined, but I think if they are incentivized in a particular way, that they will be encouraged to do the right thing, then I think it's a win-win. So I think that there's programs that can be creative that will incentivize developers and cities for that matter. There's groups like Jamboree Housing, right, that I think have been very effective throughout the country, or maybe it's Mercy House that's throughout the country. I think Jamboree Housing is throughout the state.
Yeah.
And so they're demonstrating, again, California is leading, right? Yeah. They're demonstrating that this is possible and it can be done when there's the political will and the investment being made to ensure that it, comes to fruition.
So talking about community prosperity, where do you see what do you see that could be brought to? What are we missing? Is it, you mentioned earlier, people deciding to move out or businesses maybe moving. What can we do directly in our area to help with that situation?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. When I say things, I believe in a future and a possibility of people not just struggling to survive, but they thrive. And what do I mean by that, right? I mean that we've got healthy communities, right? I think that we've got one of the big complaints that I hear from Chapman students that come from, all over the country. And they said, do you know how dangerous it is to try to ride a bike? There's no bike lanes in the city. There's no public transportation that helps students get to their internships or where they want to go. And I agree with them.
Yeah.
And so how do we create infrastructure to support healthy lives? How do we create infrastructure that allows people to ride their bikes, to jog, to, have open space, right? Especially in inner city communities or in, more densely populated. How do we create more community gardens where people are now investing in their own, food sources? So I think there's ample opportunity. And I think there's such a hunger, honestly, for people to give back and to be a contribution. I think there's been no call, if you will, for people to, rise up and get plugged in. And I think we can create those opportunities where people can get plugged in, what their contribution is, whether they want to, help volunteer and manage a community garden, whether they want to, work and advocate for bike lanes, in the community. Everything begins at a local level, right? And it's really for those local communities to be invested and engage and determine what it is that they need, and to bring that to fruition. But they really need leaders at every level, whether at the city, the county, the state, and the federal level, that will support those efforts, as they are taking those leadership roles and making those plans.
Now, when I was looking up for questions to ask you, we were looking across the board there, and there was quite a lot of bits and pieces out there about it. One of the things that I found was there was a motto: live fearlessly, love passionately, and laugh often. You mind sharing what that means to you?
Yeah, that's really one of my favorite quotes, right? So I am not a person that is driven by fear. So for me, that fearlessness, it's really about being bold. It's about, I truly believe that every person has a seed that was planted. And if they are fully self-expressed, if they can really come into their own, if you will, we will only become a more beautiful world for whatever. There's no competition here. I mean, you've got gifts and skills that I couldn't even possibly, attempt to match, and vice versa, And so I think if we can start celebrating everyone and encouraging people to live courageously and not out of fear, I think that there's been so much in our media today that really fear is a tactic to control people. Mm-hmm. And I really am all about making people contributions, and they can only do that when they step up in a courageous way. And for me, the laugh often part is we need to have fun doing it. Like, fun is something that I have a value for. I enjoy laughter. I enjoy, breaking bread with someone else and learning and conversing and trying new things and not being afraid to try new things. I think that's hopefully something I've instilled in my own kids. It's like, there's no such thing as failure in my book. I said, we celebrate failure in my home. And I said, because even, they come in, whether it's a test or something they messed up in a sport. And I just said, just tell me one thing you learned. That's all we need is one thing we learned. There's no such thing as failure. We need to be able to laugh at ourselves. We need to be able to celebrate together. We really need to be able to create that community, if you will.
Now, if I may ask, because, being part of a business is a big deal. So, when you become our new congresswoman in the 40th district, what does happen to your business? What do you have to separate? Is conflict of interest? What happens about that?
Yeah. So, I'm able to keep the business, but it's going to need to run and operate without me, which it already is, to be quite honest. I've had to take a big step back.
Sure.
I still supervise all of our attorneys, but I have an operations manager that handles all the in and outs of payroll and things like that. So my involvement has, definitely changed, I would say, over the last couple of months. And I will not be able to be split, if you will. My full time and attention is going to be given 100% to my district, to my responsibilities as a elected, federal congresswoman. I'm able to keep it. There are limits. I believe it's $60,000 is the maximum I'm allowed to receive from that business. Yeah,
Whoa.
So there are limits. I'm really not sure exactly how different. I don't know if it's because I'm a lawyer. I'm really not 100% sure, but there are limits, and obviously they need to be disclosed. So
it's funny, that's the amount of money that averagely people earn in Orange County.
Yeah, they're going to hold me to it. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, if a very important case comes up, are you able to pay attention on something like that, or is it like laws are no, I've got to still stay my distance, or are you allowed to? Because
once I'm elected,
yeah,
I would not be able to continue representing people. It's not possible. But the beauty of it, and one of the big cases that I'm working on right now is Mr. Narciso Barranco, who's the gentleman with the 3 U.S. citizen Marine sons. So I remain 100% dedicated to his case, regardless of the campaign.
Right.
I hope to have it resolved before I get sworn into office. But the beauty of having such an incredible team is that it's really my stepping back has really allowed those those other lawyers to step up, right? To take more challenging cases than perhaps they've done in the past, because I usually take the most challenging ones, but I'm there to guide them. I'm there to strategize with them. I'm there to be able to, support them in any way that I can. But it's really, I think, been great for them to be able to, come into their own and handle more complex cases than they're accustomed to.
Now, if you're allowed to share some, how is that case going? How's it been for you? I mean, it's been a big news thing right now.
Yeah, no, and it's heartbreaking, because I think, especially having produced 3 U.S. citizen Marine sons, you just wouldn't think that this is the way our country would repay you, if you will. His case is going. It will continue to go. We go back for our next hearing in January. He has a parole in place application pending. He also has a family-based petition. He's married to a U.S. citizen. If he had come to me, when his oldest entered the Marines, he would be a citizen by now. Like and that's part of the challenge, right? I think there's many people who, out of ignorance, don't realize that they have an avenue to legalization, right? But they either have been taken for a ride, they've been defrauded, they've trusted the wrong person or notary or attorney. And in his case, that's exactly his situation. He would be a permanent resident, not a U.S. citizen by now. So I am confident that we'll be able to resolve his case successfully. But he's not alone, right? I think yesterday was the 5th Marine just from Camp Pendleton alone who had a parent, in this case was 2 parents, apprehended, by ICE. I think the father was deported. The mother we can't find yet. So for me, it is just... it is unfortunate, and that's an understatement, that, our Marines or, servicemen and women from whatever branch on active duty have to worry about whether or not their own family members could be taken away, could be deported while they're serving this country. There's programs that exist to prevent that from happening, but I don't think that this administration has really given much attention or opportunity in respecting that process or permitting those individuals. The couple yesterday both had green card applications. And that's part of the heartbreak as well, is that this administration is actively going after people who have legitimate petitions pending. They're apprehending them in interviews. They're using information of affirmative filings for benefits to go after those individuals, because until you're granted, you technically have no status. But there just seems something
it's
fundamentally...
like you're cheating the system, isn't it? You're going after one who's done it the right way, but that's easy, isn't it? It's easy pickings, rather than actually doing the hard work and finding the ones they were supposed to deport way back in the day. Yeah,
and it's fundamentally unfair, and I think it's just cruel, and it's just not American, in my opinion.
So out of that interest, when you're in the service, obviously they have a whole bunch of different rules and regulations. Apart from the mental state that it is for these Marines, does it cause issues for these young men who are serving because they've got something going on? Could it hold back their, promotions or what have you?
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of them, and I, even my godson is in the Army, and I talked to, enlisted, servicemen and women as much as I can, especially during this government shutdown that's significantly impacting them. And with the ones that I've spoken with, it sounds like it's 100% depends on their chain of command.
Oh.
So yeah, there is retribution, and some of them are very
hard in the military.
Concerned about speaking or complaining or saying anything at all. And so then we try to see, do they have siblings or someone else that can perhaps bring light to this issue? But yeah, I think it depends on their chain.
So when you were mentioning before how, you had folks who, they could have quite easily or not easily, but they could have gone through the process some time ago. Was that when you were mentioning about folks in the shadows? They might have to come forward. Is that the same folks you were talking about, or is that something else?
No, really both. You know, I think it's I call the golden goose egg. I've had clients that didn't even realize that they were U.S. citizens, but because their grandparents, had U.S. citizenship, and maybe they moved abroad and their parent was born elsewhere, and they never. So we go back 2 generations in every consultation that we handle, because we want to make sure we leave no, nothing,
no stone
uncovered.
unturned.
Exactly.
Right,
Thank you. No stone unturned. And so for some people, it's like, whoa, lo and behold, they had no idea.
Right.
They think that they're, without legal status, and they turn out that they can go get a U.S. passport. So those are very rare. But I would say, yes, the predominant ones I'm speaking predominantly of the ones that, are in the shadows right now, but have opportunities. But even those that we've had applications currently filed out of fear. I mean, I've had so many clients leave. They've opted to depart. And I said, please just wait. You're eligible. And the fear is just too great that they would rather leave than to finish the process.
Prop 50. What's your take on it? And do you mind sharing with the audience maybe a little bit more about what it really means to them?
Yeah. So Prop 50 is a direct response, right, to the, power grab and the congressional seats that were created in Texas. Prop 50, the number isn't, a coincidence. It's not just about California. It's really for all 50 states. Is how do we take a stand to preserve our democracy? What happened in Texas, not a single voter had a say in whether that redistricting happened. At the very least, here in California, because we respect our democracy, it'll ultimately be up to the voters. Yeah, it'll be up to the voters to decide, and they may agree and they may not disagree. But I think, if nothing else, I encourage everyone to exercise their right to vote. I think it's important, and I think we need to appreciate and protect that right as long as we have it. I wish it wasn't necessary, to be quite honest. I am not a proponent of gerrymandering in any way, shape, or form, but I think given what is at stake and now what's happening in other states like Missouri, it's like we're going to just see this continue. And I don't know what a better response could have been, to be honest. And I've asked people this and I haven't gotten an answer yet. Is there anything else we could have or should have done? And some people said perhaps nothing. And I think there's just too much at stake to have just sat back and watched it happen.
Whether it passes or it doesn't, does it make a difference in the district that you're running for?
Yes, significantly. So right now, the district is 39 miles long, from Coto de Caza, Rancho Santa Margarita, all the way up to Chino Hills. So it's a very long vertical district. It does have part of Time and Bar, so it encompasses LA County, Orange County, and Riverside County. However, with the passage of Prop 50, it goes east Orange County, and then it goes inland Empire. It goes very horizontal all the way out to Menifee and Murrieta.
Oh, well, that's quite a long way.
Yes, it's a very long way out.
Yeah.
And so includes Lake Elsinore and other cities there. And it makes the district more challenging for a Democrat to win. In terms of active voters, it goes 9 points more GOP. It only goes 1 point of registered voters. But what nobody's paying attention to, because a lot of people say, oh, it's a losing district, you should give up. I had a blogger that posted something saying that no one should invest in the 40th district. And after meeting with him, I persuaded him. He says, now I see what you're saying. And he says, I go, will you retract then, please? Because it goes 10 points more Latino. And what we don't realize is that the demographics of that inland empire are Orange County transplants. It's people who couldn't afford to live here, right? They're commuting 2 hours a day, from Lake Elsinore to get into
Paris or anywhere else because it's cheaper out there.
Yeah, that's the only place they could afford to live. And so that to me is a problem. We've got, it's not for lack of having the resources or even the housing for that matter. We've got, housing being provided for, UCI, doctors and professors, but not for their, lower wage workers. There's no housing that's being, so it's just a matter, again, it's all about balance. It's about finding that true balance that it can be a win-win where there's enough to go around. We can create, a wonderful future where everyone thrives at all socioeconomic levels, and that we can be, a united states again.
So pass or not pass, does it make it more difficult to sort of like manage is the wrong word, but to serve over than the other, or is it really it's very much the same, just different areas?
So the demographics are very different.
Very different.
Very different. So I don't think it makes it more difficult to serve, I think it's a different population of people who are going to be represented if Prop 50 passes, right? So they're going to be impacted more on the healthcare cuts. They're going to be impacted more on the unavailability of affordable housing. They're going to be impacted more, and one thing we really haven't even talked about, which is, top of mind for me and the agenda is, safety, just basic safety, where people are concerned. I did a lot of work, both in terms of training our law enforcement throughout Orange County on the U visa when it first came out and what their role was in the process, community policing efforts. Like I feel law enforcement has, especially in California, has, made great strides in building those relationships. And then you've got, federal officers coming in and really just terrifying people that children don't know who they can trust. Is it okay to, approach this law enforcement person versus another? But also gun safety, right? I think it's heartbreaking to me today in talking. I mean, my kids are more grown, but I'll tell you two quick stories. One is I was at an event and my daughter, who's, 17 and a senior in high school, was calling me and texting me. And she says, it was noisy. I didn't hear. And I finally called her back and she was very upset with me and reprimanded me like I was a teenager and said, why didn't you call? I called you. I was texting you. And I said, why? I said, were you worried that I got in a car accident? She says, no, Mom, I thought you got shot. And that was the wake-up call for me to realize that her generation,
it's normal to them now.
This is all they've known. This is all they've seen, whether the schools, from the very beginning, right? The school shootings and everything, that this has just been something that they've become accustomed to. And that is not okay for me. Like that should not be normalized in any way, shape, or form. And then the other story, with friends of mine who have younger kids that, schools already have a challenging job, right? Teachers have a challenging job, right? And I think there's just a lot that is expected of them that I think goes beyond what their, profession calls for. Right. But now when they have to have policies and protocols to deal with ICE enforcement, now they're dealing with, safety and protocols for preparing for gun shootings and security and what does that look like? Because, when you've got a gate or a fence does not keep a, AK-47 to be able to shoot through that or windows or, doors. And, so to me, they've got now apps, right? That I've had friends who have small children that every student is obligated to have on their phone as well as the parent, which is an active shooter map. So I guess you must press a button and then it alerts the families of those, students that there's an active shooter on campus. My sister was a school teacher in Cudahy in Los Angeles for LA Unified. And I remember even back in the day, it was more gang related than anything that we're seeing now.
Sure.
But she would be on lockdown, on a regular basis, for hours at a time. And that creates a tremendous amount of stress and trauma. So even the preparation that schools have to go through, to protect the students is traumatizing. Right. To have to reassure, well, there could be an active shooter and how do you, and yeah, I can tell stories. There was a shooter outside my daughter's school not that long ago and what that was like. And I know there was a false alarm at Foothill High School, which is also in the district. There was another, false alarm where the kindergartners was a preschool and, they pretended to be little bunnies and to hide in the closet, and it's like they're trying to be creative, but it's like in this day and age, to me, there's no excuse that we deserve to give our children a better childhood and a better future. And so, gun safety is a top priority for me.
So just out of interest, because it seems like you've done some research into all this. What do you think's changed between 15, 20 years ago? I came here 20 years ago, didn't really hear too much about this, compared to today. I mean, yeah, we've got trending, we've got online stuff, whatever, but and guns have always been available in America. What do you think the change is? Why is there a sudden shift to where even faith-based organizations have to be worried?
Yeah.
Why do you think that's happened?
I think we are just beginning to see the mental health crisis.
There you go.
And I really believe that the people behind a lot of these actions, right, are not well. They are not of sound mind. They are not your typical, gun owner, if you will.
Right.
They are broken. They need help. themselves. And I think without thorough background checks and some sort of mental health evaluation being done at the, front end, I'm afraid we're only going to see that increase, because I think the mental health crisis in this country, especially after and during the pandemic and post, is only going to get worse. And I can only imagine what is going to become of a lot of the people impacted by even ICE activity, today, and what we see happening in Chicago and people who's lost loved ones. And it's like, so it's not enough to say that it's people who are angry or upset. It's really people who are not well. And we have plenty of states that still don't have any, background checks at all whatsoever. Yeah. And I think we need to be
So that careful. Really leads back into what you'd said at the very beginning of this episode, was really to do with healthcare. So losing healthcare or having problems with that is just we're on a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Is really what I hear from what you're saying, because it sort of makes sense a little bit.
And I do believe that government needs to get back in the business of, mental health institutions, if you will.
Right.
They all got shut down in California
many years ago, didn't they?
under Reagan. And I think it's going to be necessary that we bring some semblance of those hospitals back, because I think our people are crying out for help, and it's manifesting itself in very dangerous ways.
The leading into the healthcare thing is something not many people talk about, really. They just keep going on about, well, ban all guns, but that's not the problem.
No.
That's not it.
And I'm not a gun
There's not
banner.
many people who say, well, I feel it's more of a healthcare situation, which really, if you think about it, it really is. So where are families going to look after these kids? You mentioned earlier before that, there's so many families now that have the kids living with them and all the rest of it. So they're all under one roof. They're saving a bit of money here, but then everything else goes up in price. And if you don't have the healthcare, how are they going to look after them?
And I think the crisis begins in the childhood. It's not when they're adults.
No, it's way later on.
So,
it's earlier on. And
how have we failed as a society? And I mean, we haven't talked about this at all, but I firmly believe in the need of childcare, right? For people who are working and not leaving children home alone, that there needs to be an infrastructure to support. Now, is it government's role to raise children? No, but it is government's role to support families, in my opinion, and making sure that, society has, the cohesiveness that it needs to be able to function, properly and to support, each other in that infrastructure. And I just don't think we're seeing that.
Well, I think one of the things that you mentioned earlier was you spoke about how, there's a role for government, there's a role for we the people, right? And when you're talking about, well, I feel that there's something there for healthcare, for, for far younger kids, there are some school districts that lay that on already. I agree with you. I don't think it's for the government to raise your kids, but if they were to assist in some type of programming that would allow for that to be more, because more of us have to work now than we maybe did 10, 15 years ago.
Right.
Excuse me. I feel that you're on the right track thinking about helping those who are working. And it's not just about single mum and dads anymore. It's about families, how to, raise the kids.
Yeah. And I think the fundamental question is, what is the role of government? How do we support the family, right? The family is the most basic unit where values are instilled, where support is received, where, ideally, right? These are all, ideal, situations. I know people come from, broken homes and family dynamics that are not healthy.
Sure.
And not conducive to success. But I think that we have a responsibility to provide the best environment, if you will, right, for communities and people. And it doesn't necessarily have to be government directly providing those services, right? But it's really, again, it's utilizing those taxpayer dollars so that the nonprofits, right, who are effective in doing this well can do that. But I also think, again, it's an opportunity for people to really, people that are able and people that can, to see that there is a place for them to contribute, right? I think a joke around my household is my my kids learned very early on, don't ever complain about being bored because I will find something for you to do, right? And when I get asked today, people ask me all the time, what can I do during this time? So I'm like, I did a TikTok. Here's 7 things you can do right now where you are. Start where you are. Nobody's asking you to do anything, magnificent or great. It's like, are you in a school? Great. Start in your school. Are you in a church? Great. Find out what people need. They need food delivered? Then great. Why don't you help food delivery? Do you need to do it every day? No. Can you do it once a week, for 1 hour? Give what you can. And I think that is really the best in my experience of living in this country that America brings to the table, that really when called to the challenge, people do rise.
Right.
And I think we're not challenging people to rise to this opportunity and occasion where they can be a contribution. We just need to create the infrastructure where people can plug in. It's not, government isn't going to solve all of our problems. Government isn't meant to, right? But we as the people certainly have the ability, the capacity, the knowledge, the skills to contribute something. And that might be something as basic as you have a neighbor with a special needs person. Maybe they just need a break.
Yeah.
Maybe you can take that child to the park, assuming you have a trusted relationship with them.
Course.
But there's always something we can do. I think the question really is, are we looking for what we can do, or are we looking for what government can do for us? And to me, that's the difference.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I was only saying to my wife the other day is the thing that when I was growing up that was different about America compared to other countries is America were very much together. Like you just mentioned, neighbors might have other neighbors round for a barbecue or something. If somebody was hard up, somebody might say, hey, what's going on? Hey, let me help you mow your lawn, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Maybe even help them find a job. And it's sort of gone. It's sort of dissipated as that. And there's a big value in that when people come together like that. And I feel that you're definitely on the right path with that.
And it's
sure.
something we're going to need to create. It's not going to exist by default.
It always starts at the top and has to come down.
Yeah.
Right. We've sort of we've detached ourselves and we shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And have you any public events coming up where people can meet with you or talk to you coming up?
Yeah. So, there's a fundraiser tonight in Anaheim.
Wow, okay.
You can visit the website. You can message us to get more information and details. That might be too late, but we have lots of events. So Prop 50 is a big hurdle, if you will. I think there is more support across the state than there is against it. However, it's going to really determine whether or not people show up to vote. And I think right now, both in terms of endorsements and fundraising, everybody's waiting to see what the maps are ultimately going to look like. And I think what's really important for your listeners to know is that I am running in the 40th, old map, new map. It's still my district. It does change the demographics. It changes the political affiliation if Prop 50 passes. I think Prop 50 is important. And I just want to, people, even Democrats that I've spoken to that are concerned that it's somehow dissolving the independent commission. It absolutely isn't doing that. It's just putting it on hold, if you will, just until 2030. And I wish it wasn't necessary. And if I could introduce legislation to end gerrymandering, nationwide, that's something that I will, work to do. But in the meantime, I think it's necessary for the sake of our democracy, in this country. But, we'll see what happens with Prop 50. I'm up for the challenge, and I think, we'll be able to win this seat, either way.
So we've come to the time in our episode here where we turn the mic back to our guest. You've answered lots of questions, and thank you. It's been a pleasure learning from you today as well. But we want to give you that opportunity, and it could be something towards talking about your candidacy or whatever it is. But I just wanted to, or it could have been something we missed as we're chatting today. But I wanted to give you that opportunity.
No, thank you. I think what I would just say, for me, this campaign is about transforming politics and the conversations that we have around the issues we care about most, right? I think enough Americans are tired of the shaming and blaming and complaining. And I think it's come to a place that we really need to rise above that noise, and to come together as a community. There's been so much division. And my goal is really about bringing people together and across the aisle. I've got Republicans supporting my campaign. I've got Dems. I've got independents, and I really want to work with anyone and everyone that's willing to work together. And I think for me, fundamentally, it is an opportunity. Like, people think I'm crazy. I'm like, why would you enter a race, certainly at this, point in time and everything that's going on? But I really see the opportunity. I see an opportunity for, people to get re-engaged in government. I think we've fallen asleep. I think people really are waking up and taking a stand, taking back their power. I think we need to be more vocal and engaged in terms of what our electeds are saying or doing at the federal level, state level, local level, whatever it may be, because we, the people, ultimately, are the government. We are the ones that have a say in terms of what is done with our tax, dollars. What is the future that we want to be able to create? And I think for me, first and foremost is my love for this country, my love and respect for the Constitution. I want to ensure that our constitutional rights remain for future generations on every front, whether it's free speech or due process, no longer having unlawful apprehensions. And I really am committed. I am very committed to ensuring that government is there to serve our people and in the best way possible. And I just think that there is no place that we can go from here than up. So yeah, very, very privileged and honored to, be running this race. Not just, it's not about me. It's really about you and us together. So my campaign, one of the slogans is it's, a campaign driven by people and not by partisanship. And I couldn't mean that any more than it speaks for itself.
I think after what I've learned about you today, I totally believe that you are like that. So thank you for that. So just out of interest, if people would like to find out more about you, is there a website they can go to?
Absolutely, yes. You can visit lisaramirez.com. Pretty basic, straightforward. The launch videos there. We're building out the platforms, and content will probably be completed closer to the end of this month. But please, I would welcome any and all support. It's going to take a country to not only flip this one seat, but to bring the balance of power back. And I think that's what we're really in need of right now, is just to have more balance in our federal government.
Well, thank you so very much for coming on today, Lisa.
No, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful to speak.
Thank you, listeners, for tuning in to Chamber Talk. Until next time, stay inspired and connected by visiting nocchamber.com and selecting sign up for news at the homepage. For more interviews, visit chambertalk.podbean.com.